Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our webinar today on SBIR and STTR. What's the latest with programs being lapsed? My name is Andy Barnes. I serve as Director of Policy and Communications at the Clean Energy Business Network. I'm joined by my colleagues Lynn Abramson and Nadia Gallimore. Um, just want to welcome you all to our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. A few quick housekeeping notes. We will be recording this webinar, and all registrants will receive a copy of the recording afterwards, along with the slides. We are also going to be fielding questions, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time, and we can go over those at the end. So a quick highlight of our agenda today. So today's presentation, we're happy to be joined by Carly Popkin, who serves as Director at Strategic Marketing Innovations, or SMI. Also joined by my colleague Lynn Abramson, who serves as CEBN's President. Um, and we will be going over an overview of SBIR, an overview of the SBIR STTR reauthorization proposals, impacts of the lapse, opportunities to engage, and then we'll follow that up with a Q&A and group discussion. So with that, I'm happy to pass things over to my colleague Lynn, who's going to dive into the presentation.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you so much to Carly and to all of our meeting participants who have joined us today for this discussion. So if you're on this webinar, you're probably already familiar with SBIR and STTR, but just to quickly review, these programs have existed. The SBIR program for over 40 years, and the STTR program followed a few years after that. And they provide non-dilutive federal funding to help small businesses develop and commercialize new technologies. And all of the federal agencies that give out extramural R&D dollars offer their form of SBIR programs. So we're just going to use the acronyms from here on out, but what they stand for are the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and that is currently a 3.2% set aside of the federal R&D budgets for each of the agencies that give grants to small businesses. And then the Small Business Technology Transfer Program, or STTR, is a 0.45% set aside, and that is for grants for partnerships between research institutions, typically universities, can be others, and small businesses. So both small business focused, but it kind of depends who the lead is. And these have just been enormously impactful across all technology sectors. We're going to share some data on that later. But essentially, every dollar invested in these programs has resulted in $12 of benefit to the economy, plus helping small businesses develop, set up new companies, create new jobs, create new innovations. It's really been an important program, and I think for many of you on this call. So next slide, please. And unfortunately, the program is currently lapsed. And we're going to get into some of the details today about how that happened and what's next. I'm going to briefly kind of review what's happened, but Carly's going to repeat some of this in just a little bit more slowly and really get into the weeds further. So I'm going to throw some names out, some terms. Don't worry if it's a lot the first time, but just to kind of orient you. So for the SBIR program, STTR program, was due to expire on September 30th this year, and congressional leaders have been negotiating a multi-year reauthorization bill, but there are some very strong points of contention, and we're particularly seeing that on the Senate side. That's where there's the biggest division. Meanwhile, on the House side, the House passed a clean 1-year extension of the program on September 15th to keep them going while negotiations continued. And this had bipartisan support from the chairs and ranking members of the House Small Business and Science Committees, which have, on the House side, there's 2 committees sharing jurisdiction. And it passed on something called suspension of the rules, which basically means it was non-controversial and no one objected on the House floor. So you can say effectively unanimously, though there wasn't like a full vote on this. But then the bill stalled on the Senate side, and this is due to those contentious issues. So the leaders of the Small Business Committee, and Carly will talk a little bit more about the dynamics there, but essentially we had Senator Ed Markey, who is the ranking member, the Democratic leader, sought to pass the House bill, just a clean 1 year extension. But the chairman of the committee, chairwoman, Joni Ernst from Iowa, she blocked that because there are certain provisions that she really wants to see in, like some changes applied to this program. And so she offered an alternative proposal for a 1 month extension, but it also included some of those policy changes and would have applied them permanently. So that was a non-starter. And then Markey blocked her bill. We reached an impasse. And as a result, the authorization lapsed October 1st. It should be noted, we are also in a full government shutdown except for not, essential programs. So all programs are operating at a bare minimum, but even when that gets resolved and the government reopens, this program does not continue on unless it's reauthorized. So next slide, please. This is a lot of information, and I am not going to go through this whole table, and we're actually going to bring it up again later if we need to reference it in the discussion. You will get these slides, and Carly is going to dive deeply into some of the biggest sticking points here. But I wanted to just give you the lay of the land of what's happening. So these are side-by-side comparisons of the longer-term reauthorization proposals that were on the table on the Senate side. Again, we're focusing on the Senate side because that's the source of the impasse. There are some similar, provisions in the House. The House Democrats have the same bill, Republicans similar, but really the meat of this is happening in the Senate right now. So Senator Ernst, the Republican leader of the Small Business Committee, has offered the Innovate Act. And on the Democratic side, Ed Markey, the ranking member, has offered the SBIR, STTR Reauthorization Act. And so one key difference in the bills is that Senator Ernst would extend the programs 3 years, while Senator Markey's would permanently authorize the programs. And this is partially because she doesn't want to lock in programs that she feels should be revisited, and may have policy changes periodically. From our end, we'd love to have them permanent. I don't know that that's a deal breaker for anyone. We'd like to see the programs continue. But the major sticking points center around two general themes. So Senator Ernst's desire to create limits on repeat award winners, which you can sometimes pejoratively hear called SBIR mills, and also to impose retroactive 10-year review of applicants for foreign affiliations. And these have been non-starters for a lot of people in the business community and also for Senator Markey as a result. There are a lot of, from our perspective, positive ideas in both sets of the bills and a lot of things that warrant discussion and could be negotiated. But if we can't get past those two issues, those two deal breakers, we can't even talk about those issues. So this is where we are right now. So we can return to the slide again later and unpack some of the other provisions. But for now, I'm going to save those details for Carly. And with that, I am thrilled to welcome Carly Popkin, who Andy already mentioned is the director at Strategic Marketing Innovations, where she consults with clients on navigating innovation, appropriations, tax, finance, trade, and economic policy, among other areas. So before this, she served on the Hill for the offices of Senators Ed Markey and Bill Nelson, so she's intimately familiar with this. And she was also in the Irish legislature as a policy advisor. She holds a master's in public policy from the University College Dublin and a BA from the College of the Holy Cross. So welcome, Carly, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk about SBIR and what's been happening recently. So thank you, Lynn, for giving that overview. Very helpful. I just wanted to also I think what's helpful here is to how do we get here? Because we know the program lapsed on September 30th after a lot of back and forth, but I think it's important to know what has happened before that. So the SBIR program has been periodically reauthorized, and I'm going to say SBIR, but please know that it is SBIR and STTR. Just want to be concise here, and also I'll say SBIR. Has been periodically reauthorized by Congress since its inception. The last reauthorization was in September of 2022 for 3 years. There were several changes made during that reauthorization. Those include foreign risk management and due diligence provisions and changes to performance standards. So these are often called benchmarks. It's how companies had to translate from phase one to phase two, and phase two to a phase three, or to commercialization. Given that the SBIR was set to lapse this year, Congress introduced several bills. So there's the Innovate Act, as we discussed. This is the Republican proposal. Senator Ernst's proposal came first earlier this year. And then we saw Chairman Williams on the House Small Business Committee introduce his version of the Innovate Act. They're very similar bills. They overlap in a lot of places. There are some differences. And then, as mentioned, Senator Markey and Ranking Member Velasquez from New York, who is ranking on the Small Business Committee in the House, introduced their version of the SBIR STTR reauthorization. And then, given that we were coming up on a deadline of the program lapsing due to no reauthorization, the House introduced HR 5100, which was a 1 clean year extension. That 1 year clean year extension passed the Small Business Committee in the House by unanimous consent, and then again passed the House on the floor with unanimous consent as well. So no one voted against it, which is always good. But that happened on the 15th of September. Between the Innovate Act and the Democrats' reauthorization bill, there's very little overlap. There is a Six Corners agreement here that needs to come to place, so that we mentioned those are the key committees. And if we go to the next slide, I have key committees. So the key committees here, as I mentioned, are the Senate Small Business Committee. Chair is Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa. Then we have Ranking Member Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts. And the House Small Business Committee, Roger Williams from Texas, Velasquez from New York. And then the House Committee on Science also plays a role in this as well. That's Chair Babin and Ranking Member Lofgren. So these are, when we talk about the Six Corners or a Six Corners agreement, these are the folks that need to come to an agreement on these issues. So I just wanted to go over, if we go to the next slide, some key issues with the Innovate Act that we've been hearing from industry. There's a $75 million lifetime cap in funding. So why that's an issue is that this program has been around since the 1980s. Many companies that work in the SBIR space have been participating in the program since the 90s or the 80s. They have a long track record of meeting government needs, especially within DoD or DOE, has been one of the longest standing program participants. So these companies have been participating for a while. The other issue here is a 40 million annual revenue cap on phase one. So if your company has more than 40 million in annual revenue, you're no longer eligible for any new phase one contracts. It also limits the number of proposals companies can put forward to meet government needs. So it's a maximum of 3 proposals per phase one or phase two solicitations, and a maximize of 25 proposals per fiscal year. This really hamstrings a lot of companies from being able to compete on getting these SBIRs. The foundation of the SBIR program and STTR program were competition. It was about the best ideas. It was about scientific merit. These companies aren't going to DOE or DOD or HHS asking for them to fund their pet project. They are responding to the needs of the government. So limiting proposals or the amount of funding you can get or how much money your company makes, forcing you out of a program that is a merit-based program is an issue. That means the government is not going to get the best technology that they are looking for. Another issue with the Innovate Act that we've heard from industry is some of this foreign due diligence issues. So that is foreign affiliations, joint ventures, licensing agreement, or research collaborations in the past 10 years would make companies ineligible if those are with countries of concern. So that would be a company onshoring a piece of equipment from China 8 years ago that they needed to start their business, would flag these due diligence provisions. And so you are punishing companies for making business decisions that were legal at the time and not an issue. The other key issue is it's a short reauthorization period. It's 3 years. This prevents businesses from being able to plan accordingly and restarts a legislative fight that I think most would rather see not happen, so that they have assurances and stability when working within the SBIR program. And we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the program has lapsed. That happened on September 30th. It did coincide with the government shutdown. So I think some of what's going on with the SBIR fight and reauthorization is getting lost in the noise of the government shutdown. On September 30th, Senator Markey did go to the floor of the Senate and asked for unanimous consent. That means all 100 senators agree to pass HR 5100, which is the 1 year extension. Senator Ernst objected to the passing of the 1 year extension. She offered a proposal that would be a 1 month extension of the SBIR program with a $75 million cap and with her due diligence provisions. Senator Markey found this unacceptable, said that there are larger conversations that need to be had about what a long-term, comprehensive SBIR reauthorization looks like, and that we should not have the program lapse while those conversations are ongoing. So what happens next? Eventually, the government is going to need to be opened. If committees can't come to an agreement on a larger SBIR package during this time, they can extend the program through the length of a CR and attach a reauthorization of the SBIR program to a CR. The interesting thing about this is back in September, when the White House and the administration sent their list of anomalies, things that need to be solved in a CR, and their authorization anomalies, SBIR was included on that list of reauthorizations that the White House would like to see in a CR. So there is support from the White House for the SBIR program continuing. They haven't weighed in on any of their reforms, but they do like to see this program continue. So there's some thinking that however the length of this continuing resolution that gets passed to open the government, that would include a SBIR reauthorization for the length of the CR. That is not completely guaranteed. It wasn't included in the House pass CR, but I know that there are folks hoping that gets into any CR so that the program can at least be open while the government's open. Historically, reauthorization has also been attached to the National Defense Reauthorization Act, or NDAA. You would still need a CR to get the program back. You'd still need a continuing resolution to open the program, because NDA typically doesn't happen until December, isn't passed until December. But any agreement on adding anything related to SBIR reauthorization would mean all six corners need to agree on that, and there is not agreement to include that in NDA at the moment. There's also the possibility a new bill is passed and signed. I know a lot of small businesses and industry are looking to find compromise on legislation and restart the program. I know that Senator Markey's office and Senator Ernst's office are open to finding solutions that are acceptable to both senators. And then there's the full 1 year extension through passing HR 51. As I mentioned, Senator Ernst disagreed with the 1 year extension, while the other five corners want to restart the program before moving forward. I know that the five corners would rather see this program continue and negotiations continue rather than negotiate while the program is shut down. I think I have one more slide. Yes, key issues moving forward. So where are the sticking points moving forward? It seems that the conversations between staff have moved from including caps to commercialization standards. So the Innovate Act, as in the previous slide, does include new commercialization standards. The way they're defining commercialization standards for the program would be that if you receive a specific number or a certain amount of phase 2 awards under the SBIR program, you would need to have 65% of your company's revenue be non-SBIR money. That's what they're deeming as a commercialization standard. The minority staff on the Senate Small Business is seeking more information around the impacts that these new commercialization standards would have on businesses. The Innovate Act commercialization standards are also a look back. It would be the average of the past 10 years. There's concern within industry that, again, you're penalizing companies for things that were legal or acceptable 10 years ago and moving forward. So there's also a question of if commercialization standards can be forward looking. Caps on awards or funding, given Senator Ernst's countermeasure to the 1-year extension, her and her staff are still promoting caps and want to, as they view it, graduate people out of the program. However, we don't place caps on any other funding programs in the government. We don't cap primes and say they have gotten too much money from the government. There's concern that that would set a bad precedent by starting it with small businesses. Reauthorization length is also a key issue moving forward. As mentioned, the Innovate Act would be a 3-year reauthorization period, and Democrats' bill seeks permanent reauthorization. I think the fight is going to come down to how long they're able to move this forward. I think, while Democrats want permanent reauthorization, I think they'd be open to a 6-year, 8-year window on this to give companies stability within the program. There's a lot of issues around the due diligence as programs as well, retroactive and heavy-handed. While this is something that needs to be figured out between the 6 corners, there hasn't been as much focus on those conversations, and the focus has been on commercialization standards, caps, and things and provisions like that, and less on the due diligence issues that companies have flagged. And then I know the question is, does agreement from industry move the needle with the Senate staffers? If industry can come together and support specific provisions, does that move the needle with the staff of the different committees, and how that impacts their view of getting the program reauthorized? So these are all key issues moving forward as folks work through the bill and reauthorization. I'll be around to answer questions at the end, but happy to cover anything else that I might have missed.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Carly, for that really helpful overview and diving into the weeds there. I want to remind our participants that you can put your questions in the chat at any time, and we will have a period for question and answer, so we can get into anything that might be confusing or that you want to unpack further. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are right now with the program frozen. And if you are applying or you have been awarded recently an SBIR award, what does this mean for you? So this is very generally speaking, because there are so many different agencies involved. There are so many different programs within these agencies. They run on different funding cycles, right? So take it with that grain of salt that there could be exceptions to this rule. But what we're generally hearing is that existing contracts are being honored, regardless of what phase they were in. And I think some new phase 1 awards, but even more so some new phase 2 and 3 follow-on awards are proceeding. And one of the things that seems to matter, in addition to whether or not you had something locked down in contract, is when the funds would have been appropriated. So if the funds would be spent using money obligated in FY25, which ended September 30th, those things are moving along more easily. If it requires FY26 funding, that's trickier. So generally speaking, we've seen new solicitations have been paused because they would not be able to award those grants without the FY26 funds. The only new kinds of things that seem to be moving forward are, for example, like you were proceeding to SBIR two, and for some reason this money, is still available because it was already obligated, right? So it just really depends. But for the most part, existing contracts honored, and then new solicitations have been paused. So it's fairly simple. I am curious to hear if anyone, has had a different experience than that. Then at the end, I'd love to hear from you, because the more intel we can exchange within the industry and help advise one another, that's better. So unfortunately, agencies will likely discontinue the programs in FY26 unless reauthorized. There's been some discussion of could they have a little bit of discretion to make small business types of awards, maybe not officially within this program. Of course, yes, they can give grants to smaller businesses, but running these programs, requires a specific authorization. There are specific staff within the agencies. It's a specific set aside, so it would be quite disruptive. So right now they are not planning to move forward, but we are hopeful that this will get resolved in some manner soon, so that if the program restarts shortly enough, then we can proceed with those FY26 awards. Now let's talk a little bit about the impact of these programs and what it means if they don't get reauthorized, as well as if some of these changes that were under discussion were made. And so originally we were going to be joined today by Dr. Marianne Feldman, who is a professor of public policy and management at our Arizona State University. Unfortunately, she had a conflict arise, but we communicated with her and wanted to just share a few of the data points that she would have presented. So she has actually co-chaired a series of National Academy of Sciences reviews on the SBIR programs, which were mandated by Congress. And she gave a presentation on this recently at the Defend SBIR forum on September 10th. And so we've linked to that full presentation, and you'll receive that with these slides if you want to review that in depth. But overall, across various agencies, these studies have found evidence that the SBIR, STTR programs have played a critically important role in supporting US innovation and helping small businesses achieve greater success down the road. And that ranges from creating knowledge spillovers that benefit the industry as a whole, so not just that one business, but really advancing the science, to higher rates of patents compared to non-SBIR awardees, higher rates of venture funding, as well as higher rates of drug approval for NIH-funded projects. And I think those of you who have won SBIR awards in the past know this firsthand, that it really is a validator, and it helps you not just get that non-dilutive funding to move forward with your research, but also kind of is a stamp of validation on your technology that helps you attract those follow-on investments. So the studies also discussed, they said these programs have been super, helpful and impactful, but there are improvements. So there are various recommended ways for each of the agencies' programs to be improved, but it did caution against some kinds of changes that have been under consideration. And one of those is the caps on repeat awardees. And they noted that that would penalize firms that have been particularly productive in advancing R&D, that some of those firms have been really successful in actually moving the needle. And they also noted that there would be certain states that would be particularly penalized by this because they tended to have these types of entities, that were repeatedly winning awards. And so you can see some of these states here. It's New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So that's part of the reason why obviously Senator Markey is concerned. Maryland, Alabama, Texas, California, Ohio, Virginia, Florida, North Carolina, Colorado, and Arizona. So I'm going to turn it now back over to Andy to talk a little bit about what we have done so far collectively to help advocate for these programs, and what we're planning to do next, and how you can get involved.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. And I just want to start by thanking everyone who has been engaged so far. We've really enjoyed the support that you all have lended to these campaigns. Just want to applaud everyone for getting involved, to review what we've done so far in terms of these advocacy efforts. CBN and many of our partners, including the Small Business Technology Council, SMI, and folks involved with the Defend SBIR Coalition. We've been pushing aggressively to get SBIR extended, as well as STTR. Carly discussed some of the recent activity, but just to recap some highlights, more than 360 business leaders have signed on to our letters and sent emails urging Congress to pass the 1 year extension. CBN's letter had 250 signatures. We sent out an action alert as well, and we've had 360 messages go into Senate offices from constituents. SMI's letter had 112 signatures as well. And we're going to continue to keep adding signatures to this letter and amplifying these indicators of industry support going forward to keep this drumbeat rolling and make sure that congressional offices know the importance of these programs, know their impact, and urge these, especially Republican senators, to weigh in with Chair Ernst. In addition to that, small businesses from across the country, there were dozens. I was personally involved in the Defend SBIR fly-in that took place on September 9th and 10th. On Capitol Hill, folks came in and met with their congressional representatives and their staff. That was in partnership with the Small Business Technology Council, SMI, and NEIA. The House has also expressed support. So the House, as folks know, passed by unanimous consent the 1 year extension. After the Senate failed to pass that same bill, bipartisan leaders of the House Small Business and Science Committees expressed disappointment and reiterated their support for that bill. Moving forward, how can you get engaged? Again, I will flag the importance of reaching out to Senate offices. We highly encourage you to leverage CEBN's action alert to urge them to support reauthorization. In addition, our partners at the Small Business Technology Council are also asking for you to share your company's story and how a lapse of SBIR might affect your business and its employees. They have been asked by staff on the Hill specifically to compile a list of technologies that might be disrupted by this lapse. Companies that are innovating cutting edge technologies that might be disrupted or canceled due to the prolonged lapse. We definitely encourage you to take a few moments. There's a Google form link that I think we'll be sharing in the chat. And we highly encourage you to share your story with SBTC. Finally, if you're really looking to get engaged, we really encourage outreach to Republican Senate offices. Please do see CBN as a resource for this effort. Reach out to us to discuss further opportunities to engage these critical offices. We need these senators on board to reach out to Chair Ernst to get this impasse resolved. And we can help you do that. We can help set up meetings with senators and their staff. We can help tee up email messages and provide messaging guidance to you and connect you with Senate staff. We can also help draft op-eds and other communications outputs and help try to get those placed in local media if you're excited about those opportunities as well. Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined in the campaign so far, but we do need to keep this drumbeat rolling. That's a few ways that you can continue to stay engaged. With that, I think we are going to try to shift to a Q&A. Maybe I'll pass it back over to Lynn to run the show there.
Yes, thank you so much, Andy. Thank you. Okay, so another question is, Any thoughts of if agencies will act on proposals that were submitted but now in limbo with first major agency staff reductions, now the suspension shutdown? Do you think solicitations will be reissued or outstanding evaluations be picked up? I mean, my first reaction to this is if if the program somehow gets reauthorized via one of these pathways or extended, most of the agencies we do anticipate will restart where they were in the process. And yeah, it's good that you point out that it is more difficult with reduced staff. But so I think, yes, they will get picked up again if they were in some stage of consideration. Um, but the program does not need to be authorized for that to be possible. I don't know if Carly or Andy, if you have anything else you'd add on that.
Yeah, I don't have like a ton of insight on that, but I do think that there is, as you mentioned, a lot of turnover in these agencies. So I think things that tend to be slow moving at the moment, but I could see them picking up where they left off, with the
Okay,
assumption that folks that started those are still in in their jobs, once the program restarts.
great. Okay. So one participant mentioned they did actually reach out to their Senate office who was supportive of the program, but said that it was a program that was under consideration for cancellation. And that's, I think, the first I'm hearing of this. Do you have further intel?
That's the first I'm hearing of cancellation. Actually, the SBIR program was actually included as, in the Project 2025 as something that Project 2025 supported. So it was actually, promoted within that kind of framework, and we've seen that a lot of those, Project 25 has been implemented. So I that's the first I'm hearing of it, but um I think they may be the cancellation or lapse. They might be using lapse and cancellation in the same
Yeah.
sentence, is what I
Something
might
might have gotten
think.
lost in
Hmm.
the translation or there. So that's encouraging to hear. But I would say to that person who asked that, please follow up with us and maybe share, you don't have to forward if you don't feel comfortable, but what exactly they said, because we can help unpack what that means. I'm going to skip ahead just super quickly because this is an easy question, and then I'll return to some of the others. Let's assume the SBIR authorization does make it into the CR. Just to confirm, the reauthorization period would only be for the period of the CR. That is correct.
Yes. So if it's
Yes.
included as as an anomaly, like we've mentioned that it was included on the White House anomaly, the extension would only be for the length of the CR. That is, unless something like HR 51 is attached to a CR outside of what would be an anomaly. So
Yeah.
if it's included in just a clean CR, it would be for the length of the CR. Anything longer than that, it would have to be legislation being attached to a CR.
Okay, great. Yes, and I think that even the House passed extension, it is only a 1 year extension, which is not enough certainty for the program. But the idea is, okay, there are these sticking points. Let's keep working through that. Let's keep negotiating, but we don't want the program to just go away in the meantime. So those extensions have happened many times in history. We noted earlier, this program's been around for 40 years. And it's always had very strong bipartisan support. The meat of how it operates has changed a little bit, and sometimes there's been discussions about that, but it's always had very strong bipartisan support, very geographically pervasive. Um, this is okay. I do not know the answer to this question. I'm hoping Carly does. So, for NSF, you have to submit a project pitch to get into phase one. The next quarterly cycle opens November 5th. Okay, I think I might know this. Does anyone know if project pitches will be accepted during a shutdown? And if so, will there be reviews or feedback? I mean, I would imagine, I don't know, if there's like a portal, it might accept the pitch, but I would assume that they might pause the process until there's staff. I would kind of just recommend looking at the website. But do you know anything further about that, Carly?
No, not further. I think it would depend on who's deemed essential within
Yeah.
certain agencies. And if the person working on it was deemed essential, they would most likely, still be doing their work. But I would assume folks are furloughed,
Yeah.
otherwise.
when someone else just said that they are accepting pitches, but nothing seems to be getting reviewed until they come from shutdown. And the other thing we've heard about, it varies from agency to agency, but in some agencies it may happen to be contractors that are administering part of a program. And sometimes those contractors, that contract's already been paid, so those people may be working. So it really does vary. So it sounds like, keep working on your proposals, but you might have to wait a bit. Okay. This is a great question and one that we keep asking. Fundamentally, why is it so difficult to reauthorize this program? You would think supporting small business innovation would be a no-brainer. Yes, you would think. I mean, I have my thoughts, but Carly, do you want to talk to the politics of that at all?
Yeah, I think that there's just fundamental disagreement with how the program should be operating and the merits of the program. Like, what are the core principles? And I think, from what we've seen with proposals, that from the Dem side, it seems to be they want to continue the merit-based best technology. Let's not harm companies that have provided the federal government with the technologies they're looking for. Well, the other side believes that, and I think the Dems would agree, but I think the Republicans view this as a program you should graduate for. It's not a program you should continue to go to. That there needs to be new entrants. That there's these hubs around the country you can think of on the coast or in certain, Ohio has a very big SBIR kind of community, that there needs to be more diversity with new entrants into that. And I think Rep. Velasquez and Senator Markey's office would completely agree that let's get new entrants into the program. We need more entrants, but not at the expense of companies that have been supporting the federal government through the SBIR program. So I think there's just some fundamental disagreement around that. But within that, I think that all staff can agree that they do support this program. It's what do they support the program looking like moving forward? How do you put guardrails on it without, harming, with the least amount of harm to companies? I don't think anyone disagrees that companies that are only producing white papers, because that's the big kind of talking point, is there's companies that just produce white papers. No one believes that should happen, but there is an ecosystem and a role that multi-award winners or mature SBIR companies play in the federal government. It's just, how do you make sure you're giving as much to as many folks as possible? So I think those are where the kind of disagreements happen, but I do think fundamentally folks actually want to see it extended. But what that looks like, I think, is where there's disagreement here.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Ernst's office has been, she's been a supporter of and champion of SBIR. She really, believes in that program, and
Mhm.
she, has her views on how it should be structured. But I think, as to Carly's point, that's kind of creating this impasse. I want to actually come back to what we were just discussing on some of these contentious issues, but I want to address just one final sort of simple procedural question that I see in the chat. So a couple of people were mentioning that they are seeing the DOE phase 1 release 2 SBIR grants have been delayed. Now there's this lapse. What's going to happen? And yes, so earlier in the year with the change in administration, the DOE SBIR was delayed because the new administration wanted to come in and sort of decide what types of solicitations they wanted to put out, what technologies to prioritize. And now with this lapse, they are not going to likely put this, out the solicitation until the reauthorization proceeds. But again, if it does proceed at all within a timely fashion in this fiscal year, I would anticipate them reopening that. So definitely, don't give up. We're really pushing to reauthorize the program, and hopefully things will pick back up from where they were left off. I do want to return again, as I mentioned, to what you were saying just a little bit about some of these issues. Couple things I wanted to talk about. I mean, from the types of companies that CEBN works with, which are small businesses in the energy sector, I can guess, and I would like, and in a few minutes, we might actually, in a minute, we may open this a little bit up to audience discussion, but I think the retroactive foreign affiliation review would be very difficult because it is retroactive. Again, you didn't know that you weren't supposed to collaborate with this colleague or have this board member or whatnot. No one told you that before, and now you'd be penalized. I think that's really problematic. I think companies are happy to work with whatever the rules are moving forward, but it also can't be that challenging. We've raised this concern also with some of the changes on the tax credits with the FIAC, just like really try not to make this too administratively burdensome. And I don't even know if this is realistic, but I keep saying, like, could we make an e-verify for like checking your affiliations? Do you have any red flags? I think that's probably way more complex. But I just think that for the small businesses we work with, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? And I think there are ways, the last reauthorization, in 2022, they imposed this new review process. And even that, we're hearing, there are some more at like NIH, but companies being denied grants because their name sounds similar to a Chinese company, and no one's even talking to them about that during the process. There's no appeal. But
So
the caps one, oh yeah, please
no, I was
introduce
just going to
me.
jump in here.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting. And what we've been hearing a lot around I think a lot of this caps or commercialization standards have really taken up a lot of the oxygen in these
Yes.
negotiations, and they haven't really moved on to the due diligence provisions. I think it's interesting if you look at the Department of Defense, DoD, how they operate is there might be flags or concerns, but they work directly with the company to make sure that they address those, and then moving forward that they're in a space where it's the DoD feels comfortable working with them, they're safe. We've heard, as you mentioned at NIH, that that's not really the process that happens at other agencies. So I think these other agencies are looking at what DoD is doing and saying, hey, can we actually do more of that? I think the concern is how do you move forward with this? How do you standardize it so all companies know what they need to do? And I think that outside, if we're going to put in more due diligence standards, these, as you mentioned, are small businesses that don't necessarily have the capability to be like, I didn't know this person was on a paper in college and the 90s with someone. How do you help companies actually meet these goals? Because if you're working with, say, a DoD customer, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for companies to get up to speed with the security clearance, the security needs of the agency. So it's not just about implementing due diligence provisions, but how do you then help small businesses navigate that due diligence landscape as well?
Yeah. And I actually and the other thing is, like, for all of these things, and I'm going to come back to the commercialization caps. I think with the due diligence, we tend to be on the side of how do you help support companies instead of penalize them, right? So I think one of the bigger issues with what we are seeing, IP theft by foreign country is an issue. Um, I don't think it comes as much from somebody you collaborated with 10 years ago now stabs you in the back. It's more that, our foreign competitors want to, if there's something that's not like locked down in IP protection, or there's ways to evade it, they're going to copy. That's what happens in every market. And I think many companies don't want their IP poached. And in fact, we've actually even heard from some companies that one of the biggest risks to their technologies is that there is no follow-on funding. They're kind of left at this valley of death, and they don't continue to get funding. And then a Chinese company wants to buy their technology. So I feel like the more we can support companies through the process and even help provide technical assistance to them on global IP protections and strategies, I think that they want that. As part of the commercialization process, I think they would want that. I do want to return quickly because we're getting at low on time. And someone actually raised this because this is a question I've been noodling on a lot is, I don't think we have as many companies within our network that would be impacted by the award caps or the commercialization benchmarks. I think the commercialization benchmarks actually more so, but I think that $75 million cap is more within the defense industry, where there are some players that, like, their business model is we develop a technology, we spin it out. Um, we have heard, I think we have a lot of companies in our network that are like 1, 2, 5, 10 SBIRs, like they're not that many. We do know some though. We actually used to be concerned about, like, oh, are these SBIR mills, are they going to outcompete? But we've seen actually a lot of companies that their business model is, we are really good at research. We can produce the technology. And they, in fact, even sometimes partner with another business to help them produce the technology, which then the partner takes, And so, again, I think this question of repeat entrants, or one of the things we've really worked on is trying to promote the pipeline of support. How do you recruit new applicants? How do you spread awareness of the program? And also administrative simplicity. I really think the application process, the administration process is very challenging for a lot of companies. I think if you simplified that, you'd see a lot more new entrants. And in fact, we do see a lot of new participants in the program, but it's still, there are barriers. And I think they're administrative, not because somebody else is out competing them. But I do, Carly, because you're working with a lot of other industries. Can you just talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, why the caps or the commercialization benchmarks would be a problem?
Yeah, so I think that there's a little more agreement around commercialization standards than there would be caps. That I think there's a fundamental disagreement with capping small businesses um, at any level. That this would be the first time that the federal government says, "Hey, if you're participating in this program, if you're doing too good, if you're producing too much for the federal government, we don't think you should be a part of this anymore." And the idea is that once you set it at one level and let it in any piece of legislation, then it's a slippery slope and leads to other kind of guardrails that kicks out the best technology. That this should be merit based, and I think that when they did, I was at Marion Feldman's speech, and it's unfortunate she couldn't be here. When they did a blind study, when no names were attached to a solicitation, the same technologies were picked, regardless of if it was a startup or an experienced firm. So there tends to be this idea that these experienced firms push out everyone else. That's not necessarily the case. Um, Commercialization standards is just saying, like, you actually have to do something with the money. This money has to be working. And I think businesses are open to the idea of what is a reasonable expectation for that. I think sometimes, in say with folks that work with the DoD, commercialization becomes tricky because these are technologies that you can only sell to the federal government. It's not the Roombas or the LASIK or the 23andMe that have been developed through the SBIR program that can then go onto the shelf at Target or Walmart. These are technologies that stay within the government, and the government's the only customer. So those are sticking points. It gets, the more you get into it, the more complicated it gets when you start to put guardrails and standards. It's how you view what is appropriate, or how do you measure things that cannot be measured. Does the costs you save for the government count to your commercialization standards? Does that count against your cap? These are all ideas that folks have been talking about.
Yeah. And I think like when you raise the examples of Roomba, right? I think a lot of the companies we work with energy technologies, these are not typically consumer facing, or even if they are, they're larger scale. And so this is something that I think for the SBIR, one of the beautiful things about it is that it does invest in some slightly high technology risk technologies. It's okay, I have proven there's some viability to my idea, but I do need to research it further. It's at a very early stage. And you're not necessarily easily going to get venture capital for that. Or if you do, it's going to dilute you at a very, your equity at a very early stage. So, um, anyway, I think that, I think the less so than the $75 million cap, but perhaps the multiple award commercialization benchmarks might be more applicable to our members. Because again, those can kick in at 10 phase one awards. At least a quarter have to advance a phase two. And then there's like several other tiers of things. So, and I do think some of our members will be impacted. I know we're low on time. I want to yeah, and what someone in the chat is mentioning that they were under the 75 million, but were a multiple award winner. Never had issues. And the company that now graduate doesn't have any more. I don't know if I actually understand this question fully. Ever had issues with now graduate? I'm not sure I completely understand the question, and I apologize. Okay, it's just a comment. Yeah, I mean, some companies graduate, some do not, and we want to help them graduate. And in fact, one of the things we've advocated for is it needs to be more commercialization assistance. And then finally, someone did ask about the status of TABA services. It's not typically included in the reauthorization. It's kind of agency by agency. I don't know if the TABA programs, I know Dawnbreaker was originally on the list of rescissions that the White House posted in, which is the phase 0 pre-application support in March. Do you know anything about TABA? I think it's oh, I think I did actually see. I think that they might have been in the rescissions as well, but I don't know if it's still the case. Do you know, Carly, offhand? Okay. Yeah, the organization that provides it, the name is escaping me, I think was originally shut down. Yeah, it was. Okay. So that's not part of the authorization. It's kind of agency by agency, but I do think making the case that we need pre-application support, we need commercialization support is critical.